I knew the moment the laughter echoed across that wedding aisle that something inside me would break in a way that could never be repaired. It was the kind of humiliation that burns straight through the skin and settles in the bones, the kind that forces a person to see the truth they have been avoiding. In that single breath, surrounded by strangers, I felt the weight of years of silence, sacrifice, and patience snap. What came after was not rage, but clarity. The realization that sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones that finally push us toward our own freedom. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. My name is Evelyn Parker, and at 63, I have carved out a quiet life on the slopes of Asheville, North Carolina. Autumn always settles gently here. Every morning the sun drifts over the Blue Ridge Mountains, turning the maple leaves into sheets of gold. From my kitchen window, I watch them fall into the narrow path leading to my old stone house. The house has been standing for almost a century, with weathered steps and a porch that creaks whenever a breeze slides through. It is small, but it breathes with memories. My garden, a patchwork of tulips, phlox, and the stubborn herbs I have grown for years, is the place where I let my thoughts settle before the day begins. My mornings start at 5:45. I push open the window to let the mountain air spill in and brew a cup of strong black tea. There is a calm that comes with repetition, and mine includes sorting laundry, feeding the bluebirds that perch on the railing, and straightening the handmade blanket draped over the old oak chair. People in town assume I like routines because I am aging, but the truth is that routines saved me when my husband died 20 years ago. Stability became a lifeline, something solid when everything else felt undone. Most days, I drive my faithful gray Honda, the one I have kept for more than 15 years, to the St. Clair Church Community Center. I help prepare meals for the weekday kitchen and join the other volunteers in assorting fresh produce for families who need it. To the residents of Asheville, I am the picture of a modest Southern widow, quiet, polite, dependable, someone who lives gently. They know me for my casseroles, the knit scarves I donate every winter, and the way I rarely raise my voice. No one suspects anything beyond that, and I have never corrected them. Behind my calm exterior lies a part of my life I guard carefully. Long ago, when grief was sharp but my determination sharper, I took the small life insurance payout from my husband and began investing. I did not tell many people. Over the years, I bought 3 duplexes, a small brick building near downtown Asheville, and a collection of long-term bonds. I learned to read market patterns, the way some women learn recipes. Ava Martinez, my closest friend, is the only person who truly knows what my portfolio has grown into. To everyone else, I am simply Evelyn with the old Honda. My son Daniel visits every weekend. He works as a maintenance manager and often arrives with a box of warm pastries from a bakery he likes near his apartment. Through a mother's eyes, I still see the boy who used to sit on the kitchen floor building towers from wooden blocks. He is 36 now, kind-hearted and responsible, but too ready to believe the best in people. That is what worries me the most. His humility is genuine, but the world is not always gentle with men like him. Recently, he told me he is engaged to a woman named Claire Whitfield. He spoke with hope in his voice, but as he described her family and their polished life in Raleigh, an uneasiness settled into my chest. I want happiness for my son more than anything, yet something about this new chapter felt like a sudden gust against my windows. the kind that warns of change. That evening, as the sun bled into the ridges, I stepped onto the porch and traced the frame of my husband's photograph. The light settled softly over the garden, and I stood still, sensing that the life I had built so carefully might soon be tested in ways I could not yet name. If you are still watching and this story is pulling you in, comment number 1 below so I know you are right here with me. Now let us move on to chapter 2, where the first cracks begin to show. The weekend after Daniel shared his engagement news, I drove from Asheville to Raleigh to meet the Whitfield family for the first time. The highway stretched through long corridors of forests and rolling hills, and although the scenery was peaceful, I could not shake the soft pressure sitting behind my ribs. I kept reminding myself that every mother eventually faces the moment when her child steps into a new life. Still, something about this visit felt heavier, as if the air itself held its breath. Raleigh greeted me with bright lights, new buildings, and a sense of ambition woven through every street. The Whitfields lived in a gated community lined with manicured lawns and stone fountains. When I pulled up to their house, a towering structure of polished stone and grand windows, the evening sun reflected off the glass like a spotlight. Several luxury cars rested in the driveway, each one gleaming as though an unseen hand had just finished polishing them. The place was beautiful, but it lacked the warmth that makes a home feel lived in. It felt curated, like a showroom rather than a family dwelling. Lorraine Whitfield opened the door before I even reached the porch. Her smile was wide, but did not touch her eyes. She wore a necklace that looked like it had its own security detail, and her perfume filled the doorway. She greeted me with a voice smooth as silk but sharp underneath. Claire appeared beside her, elegant in a fitted dress, her posture straight as a ruler. She gave me a polite nod, though her gaze flicked down my outfit as if silently evaluating every thread. Inside, the house was filled with bright lights, marble floors, and oversized art pieces meant to impress rather than inspire. As I walked through the living room, I felt like a visitor in a museum where nothing should be touched. Lorraine led me to the dining table, already set with crystal glasses and a centerpiece so large it blocked half the view across the table. Dinner began with a parade of dishes described with unnecessary formality. Lorraine and Claire spoke freely about their vacations in Paris and their upcoming ski season, each story circling back to accomplishments or possessions. They did not ask much about my life, and when they did, it was out of politeness rather than interest. I answered calmly, choosing my words with care. I kept noticing the way Claire exchanged glances with her mother whenever I mentioned Asheville or my volunteering at St. Clair Church Community Center. A faint smile would tug at her lips, the kind that hides a judgment someone does not dare speak aloud. The moment that settled uneasily inside me came when Claire tilted her head and asked, with exaggerated sweetness, how I planned to spend my retirement. Before I could answer, she added that Daniel was lucky to come from a simple background because it made wedding planning so much easier. Lorraine laughed softly, confident that her comment was harmless. I sat still, letting the words settle, letting them show me exactly how they saw me. When I returned to Asheville that night, I made myself a cup of tea and opened my laptop. Curiosity mixed with unease pushed me to search for information about the Whitfield businesses. It did not take long to find more than I expected. Their chain of restaurants, though expanding, carried significant debt. Customer reviews hinted at mismanagement. A small article mentioned rapid turnover of staff. Another piece suggested that the Whitfield Investment Fund moved money frequently to cover shortfalls. On the surface, they sparkled. Beneath it, something trembled. I closed the laptop and sat quietly. The house was dark except for the kitchen light, and through the window the garden lay still under a blanket of night. I felt a slow, unsettled certainty building inside me, one that whispered that Daniel was stepping toward a world far more complex than he realized, and I knew I would need to pay close attention. If you are still watching and the tension is starting to feel real, comment number 2 below to let me know you are following every step. Now, let us continue to chapter 3, where things take a sharp turn. Spring arrived with a softness that spread across the mountains, but it did nothing to ease the tension rising inside me. As the wedding date drew closer, the Whitfield family shifted every detail of the celebration to a luxury resort along the Blue Ridge Parkway. The place was beautiful in the way expensive things often are. Perfectly trimmed hedges, stone patios polished to a shine, and panoramic terraces that looked out over endless ridges. Yet beneath all that beauty, the air felt tight, as if the entire venue had been built to impress rather than to welcome. More than 200 guests were expected, most of them associates and friends of the Whitfields. Only a handful came from Daniel's world. I watched him move through the resort lobby during one of the planning meetings, shoulders tense, eyes flicking between staff members and his future in-laws. He looked like a man trying to keep pace with a world that was not built for him. Every time I caught his expression, a knot pulled a little tighter inside my chest. Lorraine was quick to take command of every moment. She insisted on additional press coverage from a regional lifestyle magazine. She contacted a renowned chef known for intricate dishes that photographed well. She spoke about drone footage, curated playlists, and specialized lighting, as though the wedding existed for an audience rather than for two people beginning a life together. Claire seemed delighted by all of it. She walked with a lightness that suggested the extravagance was her natural habitat. Daniel, ever patient, nodded at each new idea, though I could see how exhausted he was becoming. I stayed quiet, observing. The memory of my visit to Raleigh clung to me like a warning. I had hoped that perhaps I had misread the Whitfields, that maybe nerves or first impressions had colored my judgment. But as the days passed, it became clear that their priorities revolved around image, not the marriage itself. I felt a slow, steady shift inside me, something protective and firm. I had spent my life moving gently through the world, but I knew how to stand my ground when it mattered. One afternoon, I met my friend Ava and my attorney, Marcus Lee, at a small cafe in Asheville. Marcus listened as I explained my concerns about Daniel's future and the instability I suspected behind the Whitfield's polished exterior. Ava placed her hand over mine and encouraged me to trust my instincts. Marcus suggested a series of legal protections, each more technical than the last, and his calm tone helped me focus. By the time he finished outlining the possibilities, the idea had formed clearly in my mind. I decided to establish Henderson Holdings, a family investment entity that could secure Daniel's future, regardless of what unfolded after his marriage. That night, after reviewing my financial documents, I began setting the foundation of the company. I thought it would simply be a protective measure, a quiet safeguard. But as I gathered paperwork and reached out to advisors, an unexpected discovery stopped me cold. A local media contact forwarded a set of leaked emails connected to the wedding publicity. Among them were messages from Claire discussing how a narrative about the modest mother from the mountains could create sentimental appeal. The words describing me were coded in condescension. I read the lines again and again, feeling each one settle heavily in my heart. The sting of those emails was sharp, but it carried clarity. This was no misunderstanding. Claire and her mother saw me as a prop. And if they viewed me that way, how did they view Daniel? I closed the laptop slowly. The decision was already made. I would finalize Henderson Holdings before the wedding. I would secure every protection Daniel needed, quietly and thoroughly. And I would be ready for whatever unfolded next, even if it meant stepping into a storm I had hoped to avoid. If you are still watching and the unfolding drama has you hooked, comment number 3 so I can see who is staying with the story. Now let us move into chapter 4, where the pressure begins to rise. The days following my decision unfolded with a clarity I had not felt in years. The first step was to complete every legal requirement for Henderson Holdings. My attorney, Marcus Lee, guided me through each document with patient precision. I sat at his long oak desk in downtown Asheville, signing page after page while the late morning light filtered through the blinds. Each signature felt like placing a stone on a foundation I had been quietly preparing for 2 decades. When the final document was complete, Marcus slid the folder toward me with a calm nod. Henderson Holdings was officially created. Only Marcus and my friend Ava knew what I was building. I intended to keep it that way. Back home, I spread out the newly issued papers across my dining table. The seal of the state gleamed faintly in the lamplight. I had structured the company so that Daniel would become managing partner, though he would hold the title only after the wedding. For now, I kept it simple. I wanted his introduction to this world to be gradual, gentle, and on terms I could control. My plan for the rehearsal dinner was modest on the surface. I would present a small envelope with a simple check, something unremarkable enough that Claire and her mother would overlook it. They would never suspect what sat behind it, a fully functioning investment entity holding real assets and quietly expanding its reach. The next several days were filled with transactions and careful steps. I examined every thread of the Whitfield family's business dealings. Their restaurants depended on several commercial properties leased from different owners. One particular development caught my eye, a set of parcels near the outskirts of Raleigh that the Whitfields were counting on for expansion. Working with a discreet broker, I secured rights of first refusal for 2 of the parcels and options on a third. These documents, dry as they appeared, were small levers capable of moving much larger pieces. I knew the Whitfields would never imagine that the quiet woman from Asheville could interfere with anything in their orbit. Each time I traveled to Raleigh for a planning session, I made sure to appear exactly as they expected. I wore simple clothes. I listened politely while Lorraine spoke about specialty florists and imported champagne. I let her believe I was merely trying to keep up with her world. The truth sat in my handbag, in the form of contracts and agreements that would soon shift the balance of influence. There was a certain irony in watching her speak so confidently while having no idea what I was preparing behind the scenes. Daniel, meanwhile, grew increasingly uneasy. One evening he sat at my kitchen table, pushing a mug of coffee between his hands as though trying to warm himself. He admitted that he felt overwhelmed by the pace of the wedding and the constant expectations placed on him. His voice carried a quiet strain that pierced my heart. I wanted to tell him everything, to lay the documents before him and explain that I had already secured a safer future for him. But I held back. The timing was not right. He needed calm, not more weight on his shoulders. So I offered reassurance, even though silence pressed heavily between us. In the final week before the wedding, I completed every outstanding task. Henderson Holdings had its accounts established, its agreements filed, its structure organized with care. I spent one entire afternoon reviewing everything once more. When I closed the folder, I felt the stillness of a woman who has stepped firmly into the role she had hoped never to need. I had protected my son as quietly as I could. Now, the next steps would unfold on their own. As the sun fell behind the mountains that evening, I rested my hand on the stack of documents. The first battle was in place. What remained was to see how the storm ahead would break. If you are still watching and feeling the weight of what is coming, comment number 4 below to show you are still here. Now, let us step into Chapter 5, where everything starts to unravel. The morning of the wedding rose clear and bright over the Blue Ridge Parkway, as though nature itself wished to witness the grand display the Whitfield family had spent months assembling. The resort shimmered with polished stone, sweeping terraces, and archways overflowing with pale roses. 200 guests drifted through the courtyard in tailored suits and glittering gowns, murmuring politely as servers passed with flutes of sparkling wine. A live string ensemble played near the ceremony platform, their music drifting softly over the valley. I arrived early, carrying a modest envelope tucked neatly inside my handbag, an envelope the Whitfields believed held all I could possibly give. I walked toward the seating area, taking in the towering floral installations and the aisle lined with lanterns. Everything gleamed with a calculated grandeur. Still, my attention stayed on Daniel, who moved through the crowd with a practiced calm. His shoulders were tense, but he forced a polite smile at each guest who greeted him. As I took my seat in the front row, the faint rustle of silk behind me drew my attention. I heard Lorraine before I saw her. Her voice carried just far enough for those nearby to hear. She spoke with a tone dipped in amusement as she said that I was not a real mother at all, only a mistake wrapped in a dress. Claire's soft, delighted laugh followed, a sound sharp enough to cut through the music. For a moment, the world around me narrowed. The sunlight dimmed and the air thinned, as though the mountains themselves had taken a breath and held it. I felt an ice-cold thread slide through my chest. A few nearby guests shifted uneasily but said nothing. Silence became its own witness. I did not turn around. I did not give either of them the satisfaction of a reaction. But Daniel heard everything. He had been only a few steps away, adjusting the sleeve of his suit. When he lifted his head, I saw something in him crack open, something deeper than hurt. His expression hardened with an understanding that could not be undone. Without hesitation, he walked toward the small microphone set up near the altar. The musicians fell silent as his footsteps echoed against the stone tiles. Conversation died away. 200 guests slowly turned toward him. The officiant froze mid-preparation. Even the wind seemed to still. Daniel stood beneath the arch of roses, the sunlight on his face revealing a mixture of grief and resolve. The words he spoke were clear and steady. He would not marry someone who mocked his mother. He would not join a family that found entertainment in cruelty. Claire's shock rippled visibly through her entire body. Her lips parted in disbelief, but no explanation she offered held any weight. Richard pushed his way forward, red with fury, calling Daniel a man who lacked gratitude, a man they had given everything. The accusation struck like a slap across the courtyard. A hush spread through the crowd. Phones rose discreetly as people recorded the unfolding disaster. I rose slowly from my seat, stepped forward, and met the storm with the calm that had anchored me through harder years. I took the microphone. My voice remained even. I thanked the Whitfields for their lessons in humility, then revealed the truth they never imagined. Henderson Holdings had secured rights and positions in key developments they depended on. Their assumption that a quiet woman must be powerless had led them to expose far more than they intended. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Claire attempted a final rescue, claiming they had already secured priority backing from a New York fund. But the broker standing among the guests stepped forward, confirming that Henderson Holdings now held the crucial options. The color drained from Claire's face. Lorraine swayed as though the ground shifted beneath her. Richard stood frozen, fury turning slowly into something that resembled fear. Daniel removed his ring and placed it gently on a nearby table. Together, we walked away from the shattered ceremony. Behind us, the grand wedding dissolved into a murmur of disbelief. Ahead, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows along the terrace as we stepped into a new and unavoidable future. When Daniel and I left the resort on the Blue Ridge Parkway, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything that had happened hung in the car like a thick fog. The sun was beginning to lower behind the hills, painting the sky in muted gold, but neither of us noticed it. Daniel gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale, and I could see the tremor in his hands each time he shifted lanes. My heart ached for him, though I kept my expression calm. The storm had already passed for me. For Daniel, it was still unfolding. A few miles away from the resort, he pulled into a scenic overlook. The valley stretched out below us, quiet and endless, as though offering a place for broken things to rest. Daniel stepped out of the car and leaned against the railing. I joined him, letting the cold mountain air clear my thoughts. For a long moment, we simply stood there. Daniel finally exhaled. His voice was raw from holding too much inside. He spoke about the embarrassment of walking away from a wedding in front of 200 people, and the shame that tangled with relief deep in his chest. He admitted that he had felt lost inside the world of the Whitfields for months, as though he were performing a role instead of living his own life. He spoke about the job offer Richard had dangled in front of him, not as an opportunity, but as a leash. As Daniel let everything spill out, I stayed beside him quietly, knowing he needed to empty the weight he had been carrying alone. When he finished, I placed a hand on the railing. I told him that today had pulled the masks off everyone, including ourselves. I spoke slowly, carefully, because I wanted him to understand that I would not steer his life for him. I gave him 3 paths, not as commands, but as possibilities. He could attempt to forgive and rebuild with Claire, though the road would be steep and painful. He could walk away from her and from the Whitfields entirely, choosing peace instead of conflict. Or he could embrace the opportunity waiting for him within Henderson Holdings, the company that now stood as his own foundation for the future. Daniel did not respond immediately. I watched him stare down into the valley, wrestling with the memories, with pain, with the version of himself that had been molded to fit the Whitfield standards. I knew he was replaying Claire's laughter and Lorraine's words. I knew he was remembering every moment he had questioned his worth in their presence. His silence said more than any words could. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and I saw Claire's name. He hesitated, then answered. Even from where I stood, I could hear her sobs. She was devastated, not because she had hurt him, but because guests were whispering about her. She wanted him to return to the ceremony and tell everyone it had been a misunderstanding. She never mentioned my name. She never apologized. She simply wanted to salvage her reputation. When Daniel ended the call, something had settled inside him. He turned to me with a clarity I had not seen in months. He said he chose to move forward with his own life. He would not return to the Whitfields. He would not let anyone control his future. He wanted to build something real through Henderson Holdings and create a life defined by his own choices. A calm warmth filled my chest. It was the feeling of watching my son become the man I always knew he could be. We walked back to the car together, and when Daniel started the engine, his hands no longer trembled. The sun cast a soft glow over the road ahead, long and open and waiting. We drove forward, leaving the ruins of the wedding behind, stepping into a future that finally belonged to him. If you are still watching and sensing the storm building beneath the surface, comment number 6 to let me know you are ready for what comes next. Now let us move into Chapter 7, where consequences finally begin to take shape. 3 months slipped by after the disastrous wedding, and winter had begun to settle over Asheville, North Carolina. The air grew sharper each morning, and the mountains carried a soft veil of mist that seemed to blur the edges of everything. Life felt quieter, steadier, as though the chaos of that day on the Blue Ridge Parkway had finally drifted far enough away to become a memory, rather than a wound. I noticed the calm most in Daniel. There was a steadiness in him now, a sense of direction that had not existed before the truth finally surfaced. The Whitfields, however, faced a very different season. Their downfall did not happen slowly. It collapsed like a structure that had been hollow for years and finally met the wrong gust of wind. Word of the wedding traveled quickly through the community. Guests whispered. Local publications reported the scandal. The story of a wedding canceled in front of 200 people, combined with the revelations that followed, spread through social circles with an energy of its own. The Whitfields' polished image cracked wide open. Business partners withdrew quietly. Friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Richard's reputation in the business world suffered a blow he could not mend. Many began to examine his past deals more closely, and what they found made them wary. Lawrence Whitfield Industries, once considered stable, was now seen as a sinking ship. Meanwhile, Henderson Holdings, under Daniel's growing leadership, began restructuring the commercial properties it now controlled. The more the company solidified its presence, the more strained the Whitfields became. Because of their financial trouble, they were forced to sell remaining shares at values far below what they had once boasted of. Several partners who had long worked with the Whitfields shifted their support to Henderson Holdings instead, citing reliability and stronger financial planning. As these transitions continued, the Whitfields' situation worsened. Then came the blow that seemed to wound Lorraine the most. The country club she adored, the place where she hosted countless luncheons and charity events, delivered an official notice. They would not be renewing their lease on the land. Henderson Holdings had purchased the property and planned to repurpose it for a future development. There was nothing personal in the transaction, but for Lorraine, it might as well have been a deliberate strike. It removed her from the one place where she still held a shred of social presence. A week later, I received a phone call from Richard. His usual confidence had vanished. His voice carried the strain of someone who had not slept well in weeks. He wanted to discuss possible cooperation, hoping Henderson Holdings could partner with one of his remaining ventures or extend assistance to stabilize his business. I listened politely, allowing him to say everything he needed to say. When he finished, I reminded him gently that arrogance always has a price, and everyone eventually pays it. Claire's decline was quieter, but perhaps more severe. She moved in with distant relatives in Columbia, South Carolina, after being shunned by most of her social circle. For months, she tried to secure work in the fashion industry, but found doors closed. The public nature of the failed wedding had stained her reputation in ways she had not anticipated. She spiraled into isolation, consumed by the knowledge that she had played a central role in her family's downfall. Daniel moved in the opposite direction. His confidence grew as he stepped fully into his role at Henderson Holdings. I watched him speak in boardrooms with clarity and authority. Partners respected him. Decisions came naturally. The shy uncertainty that had once clouded his presence was gone. He had found his own path, free from the shadow of anyone else's expectations. One afternoon, I stood inside his new office, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the windows. The view stretched far, dotted with the glow of possibility. In that quiet moment, I understood the truth. Victory was not found in watching others fall. It was found in freeing my son from what had been quietly suffocating him. The world had shifted, and Daniel was finally standing in the place he was meant to be. Winter in Asheville began to loosen its grip, and the air no longer carried the sharp bite it held a few weeks earlier. The snow along the sidewalks melted into thin, uneven lines, and sunlight returned with a gentler warmth. I felt the shift not only in the weather, but within myself. The heaviness that had wrapped around me since the disaster on the Blue Ridge Parkway slowly thinned, as though a long storm had finally passed. My new home, a smaller cottage on the edge of town, was nearly ready. I spent my mornings unpacking boxes, folding linens, and choosing where each picture frame would rest. It felt like rearranging not only a house, but a life. Daniel was adjusting too. His schedule had grown full, filled with early strategy meetings and afternoon site visits for upcoming development phases. Yet he carried an ease he had never shown during the months he spent tangled in the world of the Whitfields. He woke earlier, ran in the mornings, and approached his days with clarity. He had cut all ties with their family, and the absence of their expectations allowed him to breathe again. I watched him step into this new life without hesitation, as though he had always been meant to walk in this direction and had only now discovered the road. As I organized the last room of the cottage, a question lingered in my mind. How long should a person hold anger before it becomes another kind of burden? I had carried a quiet resentment for months, justified resentment, but it did not feel useful anymore. I thought of the years I spent keeping my wealth private, the years of being underestimated, and the path that had led me to build Henderson Holdings. But I also understood that victory is not something that needs to be carried like a shield. Letting go might have been the last step in the transformation that had already begun. One afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The handwriting was uneven, the ink slightly smudged. It was a letter from Claire. Her words were shaky, sometimes wandering, but sincere. She apologized for the cruelty she had shown me and admitted that she had been shaped by a household that constantly ranked people by status and wealth. She wrote that she had believed that way of thinking was normal, only to realize after losing everything that it had never been kindness. She did not ask me to forgive her. She only wanted me to know that she finally understood the harm she had caused. I read the letter twice, then a third time. I did not feel relief, nor anger. Instead, something loosened in my chest. The wound she created did not vanish, but its edges softened. I realized the letter was not a request for redemption. It was a sign that she was beginning her own reckoning, one she would have to face without me or Daniel. That evening, I told Daniel about the letter. He listened while leaning against the kitchen counter, thoughtful but calm. He said he did not wish her harm, but he no longer wished to be tied to her future either. His voice held no bitterness. It held clarity, the kind that comes after making a choice and living with it. Days later, I finished arranging the cottage. I opened the windows to let the cool air circulate, carrying out the old and welcoming the new. There was a room set aside for the future, a room that could one day hold a crib or remain a quiet guest space. The possibility itself was enough. Henderson Holdings continued to steady itself under Daniel's lead. The company was stable, growing, and respected. The life we had built quietly and patiently was now taking its full shape. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I stepped outside and stood on the porch of my new home. The sky glowed with soft light, and for the first time in a long while, I felt entirely unburdened. The true ending had never been the downfall of the Whitfields. It was the freedom Daniel and I had reclaimed for ourselves. I breathed in deeply, letting the past finally drift away. If you are still watching and you can feel the end closing in, comment number 8 below so I know you are with me until the final moment. Now let us step into the conclusion, where everything comes full circle. Spring unfolded gently across Asheville, bringing soft breezes and the first hints of green on every branch. The chill of winter faded, replaced by the quiet promise of renewal. I felt it echo inside me. My cottage had fully transformed into a home, not just a place to sleep, but a place where my heart settled without tension. Each morning, sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, landing on floors I had polished myself, and I felt a sense of belonging I had not known in years. Daniel flourished in this new season as well. Henderson Holdings released its strongest quarterly report yet, a clear sign that the foundation we had built together was steady and growing. Partners respected him, competitors noticed him, and the local business community began to speak of him as a rising figure worth watching. Watching him lead meetings with calm authority filled me with a pride that warmed the deepest part of me. It was not the company's success that moved me most, but the confidence that now shaped every action he took. The Whitfields faced a different fate. Their grand home was sold to cover debts, forcing them into a smaller property far from the circles they once dominated. Richard attempted to revive fragments of his business, but the industry had turned its back. Reputation, once lost, had a way of staying gone. Lorraine withdrew almost completely from social life, overshadowed by the memory of a wedding that had collapsed in front of 200 witnesses. Claire left the state and relocated to another city, trying to rebuild with limited prospects. She faced hardship, but at least she no longer hid behind excuses. One afternoon, I encountered Richard at a small community fundraiser. He looked older, worn in ways that had nothing to do with time. His shoulders sagged, his eyes carried a dullness that had replaced his former pride. Our conversation was brief. He admitted that arrogance had undone everything he once valued. I did not scold him. I simply wished him clarity on whatever path remained ahead. As we parted, I felt the last thread of resentment dissolve. Later that week, Daniel brought me to see a major development Henderson Holdings was constructing. The steel frames reached upward, catching the sunlight like the bones of a future city center. He said it was the result of patience, vision, and the lessons I had taught him without ever speaking them aloud. Standing beside him, I felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming fullness of knowing we had reached this place together. When I returned to my cottage that evening, the sky had settled into shades of gold and rose. I brewed tea and stood by the open window, letting the breeze carry the scent of early blossoms inside. Peace settled over me, deep and unshakable. In the end, our story was not about revenge. It was about freedom. Daniel's freedom to choose his own life, and mine to release the weight I had carried too long. The future stretched wide before us, calm and filled with possibility. Early summer sunlight filtered softly through the curtains of my cottage, warming the wooden floor beneath my feet. The quiet of the morning wrapped around me like a gentle reminder of how far life had carried me. I sat at the small kitchen table, the same place where I had spent countless hours reflecting, planning, and rebuilding. The journey behind me felt both distant and vividly close, as though each moment still breathed somewhere inside the walls of this home. I thought of everything that had shaped the path to this peaceful morning, the years of quiet work, the moments of being dismissed, the sting of that insult spoken in front of 200 people, and the strength Daniel found when he refused to let disrespect define our family. Every step had led us here, and I finally understood that none of it had been wasted. I realized that what many would call revenge had never been my true purpose. I had simply allowed consequences to meet those who created them. The real victory was not the fall of the Whitfields. It was the way Daniel and I reclaimed the dignity that had always belonged to us. Walking through town one afternoon, I saw Daniel speaking with a woman he had met at a business event. His posture was relaxed, his expression open, and I sensed the beginning of a new chapter for him. Life, I knew then, always finds ways to bloom again. That evening, I stood at my doorway, watching the last light fade over my garden. Peace settled around me like a promise. I knew, with complete clarity, that the greatest justice is living with self-respect and never letting anyone make you believe you are small. In the end, some stories do not close with grand gestures, but with a quiet return to oneself. When pride collapses and illusions fade, what remains is the deeper truth that dignity is never granted by others. It is claimed from within. Life has a way of revealing who we are when the noise finally settles. Strength grows in silence, in patience, in the steady decision to build a life rooted in self-respect rather than approval. And sometimes the most meaningful justice is simply choosing peace and walking forward without bitterness. The past becomes lighter when we release it, and the future opens when we trust our own worth. Thank you for spending this time with the story. If it stirred something in you, Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, follow the journey, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart.